You mentioned the groundswell of support, the public interest. We certainly heard from folks, parents, others who have questions too. And I would like to read one of them to you now. This is from Patty in Maryland, who asks, rather than age, what behaviors show a child is responsible to have their own cell phone? And how can parents develop a backbone to set limits on inappropriate apps and screen time with confrontational or naive youth? Commissioner.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question. The one thing I left out of my previous answer is that I'm a dad and I have three small kids. My oldest is 10, and we're already fighting those battles in my home around YouTube and content and how I can keep that out or limit that from her life. And I know that my two sons below her will have those same questions. Um, Part of the reason in our advisory, we're very clear about saying that parents and caregivers should delay giving a device to a young person that can access social media, is because one, there aren't any controls. There are very little in the way of controls, and the controls that do exist are all really left up to the parent to try to figure out on their own. Number one. Number two, we know that the ages of 8 to 14 are particularly vulnerable from a neurodevelopmental standpoint towards things like identity formation, the formation of social relationships, the formation of confidence and willingness to take risks. And that's when brain development is particularly vulnerable, which is why we've laid out the benchmark of age 14 as the minimum age to start. Um, but that parents should reassess both the data when their child turns 14 and reassess the social and emotional development of their child to see whether it's appropriate. Part of why we laid out 14 here in New York City is because 14 is also a time when young people are going into high school and where in this city they're riding the subway alone and are achieving a level of independence that may not be the same in other jurisdictions. And we know that parents want to keep track of the whereabouts of their children, so we're mindful of that. But the data is changing all the time, and 14 is a pretty good benchmark. So I think age is really important in this conversation. It's also true that the US Surgeon General, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Family Physicians have said there is no safe age below adulthood. They cannot find a safe age to initiate social media in any age group below adulthood. And so that's a pretty damning indictment of what these technologies are. Now, if you're a parent on the front lines of this battle, counseling their child about social media use, if you're one of those parents who have already started giving their young person a device before the age of 14, number one, I want to say you're not alone. Number two, there's no reason to feel shame about this. Take this as an opportunity to start to reshape the conversations and the relationships you have with your child around social media use, not to snatch the phone away and get to zero, but how do we take a harm reductionist approach where we say, how can we start to limit? How can we start to reshape? How can we start to
Mm.
put in a few controls around monitoring content that I know some of the platforms say that they're building? And ultimately, also as adults, how do we model better behavior in front of our children? Because they're learning from us. One of the biggest messages we got from our June 2023 convening from young people was almost an indignance saying to us, how dare you lecture us about social media use when you yourselves can't control your own use in front of us? And so we've got a lot of work to do as a society, but we need to take the power back. And I know that as a parent, I felt very disempowered at times. And so part of what we're trying to do is build up the tools and the responses to empower people.